My name is Rose Quizam-Villazor, and I'm the interim co-dean of the law school. Welcome to Rutgers Law School's memorial in honor and celebration of our colleague and friend, Frank Askin. I want to acknowledge and thank Frank's wife, Marilyn, for being with us tonight, who, as you know, will be receiving an award. Their son, Jonathan Askin, and Frank's son, Steve Askin, are also here with us. And there are many other speakers who will share with us how important and special Frank was to the Rutgers Law School community, to New Jersey, and to the country. I will therefore keep my remarks about Frank brief. In September 1963, Professor Askin entered Rutgers Law School in Newark as a student after an earlier career as a journalist. He was appointed to the faculty directly upon his graduation with the highest honors in 1966. As a student, one of his professors was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and when appointed to the faculty, they became colleagues, both teaching civil procedure. Professor Askin is credited with having introduced his colleague to the legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union, who was visiting Askin at the time. Professor Askin also taught labor law, election law, and constitutional law, and in 1970, he established the Constitutional Litigation Clinic. Professor Askin retired in 2016 after 53 years at Rutgers. But even before then, he had become a nationally known constitutional law expert. Upon his retirement, he was awarded the Rutgers Medal, and the clinical wing of the law school was named after him and Marilyn. In 2017, he also received the American Association of Law Schools Clinical Section's highest honor, the William Pincus Award, and the Great Teacher Award from the Society of American Law School Teachers, SALT. I also want to thank the members of the Frank Askin Memorial Committee members for their work in putting together tonight's program. As I mentioned, there are several of us who will be speaking tonight to honor and remember him. But these members in particular worked really hard to ensure that we can celebrate Frank appropriately. Those members are John Dubin, Ron Chen, Paul Trachtenberg, Penny Venetis, Rob Steinbaum, Nate Nakau. Alumni included Lennox Hines, Savannah Potter Miller, Danita Judge, Yael Bromberg, Nancy Smith, and Neil Mullen. Lastly, many of you know that Frank was deeply committed to the law school. He and Marilyn had created an education fund. If you would like to make a donation to the Frank and Marilyn Clinical Education Fund in memory of Frank, please look for the links in the chat. Thank you. And so now I would like to introduce our moderator for tonight's speaker, distinguished Professor Penny Venetis. Professor Venetis.
Thank you, Rose, and welcome everyone. As you just heard, will hear, and already know, Frank Askin was a legal lion. It is only fitting that we honor his life and his life's work on the first Monday in October, the opening day of the US Supreme Court. In typical Frank Askin fashion, working with the Alliance for Justice, Frank started the National First Monday programs in 1993. The First Monday programs, now in their third decade, are a way for law students around the country to stop and think about the potential impact of the cases that the justices are considering every new term. Frank liked to say that everything old is new again. How true that is. A very conservative Supreme Court this term is reevaluating abortion rights, the Second Amendment, religion in schools, and the boundaries of government surveillance. The legal landscape and our lives may be very different at this time next year. Frank saying that everything old is new again was always a call to action to remain vigilant. His saying means that we cannot take anything for granted and must always be prepared to defend the Constitution and for fight for equality and liberty. Frank knew this from experience. Even though in the 1970s, he successfully tackled racial profiling in policing, government surveillance, and overt segregation in municipal hiring practices, those scourges keep rearing their ugly heads. Frank knew that keeping them at bay is a never-ending game of whack-a-mole. Frank Askin loved the law and in it saw infinite possibilities. He had faith that the system could be just if an army of lawyers had the courage, passion, and smarts to guide people in power to do the right thing. He was not naive, though. He knew that defending rights was a tough and sometimes ugly job. Frank was always up for the fight, though. And to help him in the fight, he devoted his life to creating and training an army of social justice advocates at Rutgers Law School. Frank Askin was instrumental in creating our award-winning clinical program that ranks among the top clinical programs of the nation year after year. We now have 9 clinics and thousands of graduates. And through his and Marilyn's extremely generous contributions to the law school, our clinical program continues to thrive and carry on their groundbreaking advocacy work. A disproportionate number of our clinic graduates have reached the pinnacle of the legal profession as top lawyers and leaders at places like the Center for Constitutional Rights, the ACLU, the Brennan Center, and the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, to name just a few. Additionally, many of our clinic graduates are senior partners at top law firms who devote a significant chunk of their time to pro bono work. Many of our alumni continue to work with our clinical programs as co-counsel. Our graduates, who are part of Frank Askin's army of social justice advocates, is incredibly large. And it was extremely difficult to select a small handful of them to speak today. But we salute all of our clinic alumni for carrying on Frank's work and for being his legacy. We invite you to speak during the open mic session after the formal program is over. When Frank passed away, my email lit up like a Christmas tree. I heard from students who graduated decades ago, as well as from students who graduated the last year that Frank and I taught together. The common message of the emails was that Frank and our clinic had changed their lives. I read that phrase over and over again as tears streamed down my cheeks, in part because Frank Askin changed my life as well. Frank hired me as a relatively newly minted lawyer. He told me that someone had slipped my resume under his door. To this day, I don't know how he got my resume. That means that our meeting was clearly fate. Frank hired me even though I was a law firm lawyer, because through my pro bono work, I had developed a specialty in international human rights law. In the early 1990s, when many law schools did not even teach international human rights, Frank had the foresight to see that international law could be used to expand rights of marginalized groups. And he was more than happy to let someone who was 30 plus years younger than him take the lead in doing so. Despite our age and experience gap, Frank treated me like his equal law partner from the start. We would each develop our own dockets and run the constitutional litigation clinic as equal partners, along with, at various times, John Hyman, Ron Chen, the late Eric Neisser, and our unflappable assistant, Quintella Hanks. Frank and I taught as partners for nearly 25 years, and during this time, we had amazing victories, including a New Jersey Supreme Court finding that private shopping malls are the new town squares and had a constitutional obligation to respect free speech. That private homeowners associations should be treated as municipalities for constitutional purposes. That parks should be open to all regardless of residency. That immigrants who are detained upon entering the US are protected from abuse by international law. And one case that we worked on together for 2 decades is finally getting its day in the international arena. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is finally hearing our petition asking it to find that disenfranchisement of people who have committed crimes violates international law. Through our work together, Frank and I had a tremendous amount of fun and became very close friends. We not only brainstormed about the law, but also tackled the curveballs that life inevitably throws at all of us, including premature deaths of loved ones and serious illnesses. Frank, I miss you. I think about you every day that I am in the law school. Thank you for being my biggest cheerleader. And even though I was never formally your student, I will always consider you my teacher and my mentor. I am delighted and honored to be part of this memorial service. Today's program will focus on the critical role that Frank Askin played in developing two groundbreaking programs at Rutgers Law School. These are programs that other law schools have copied throughout the decades: our minority student program and our clinical program. Today's program will also focus on the areas of law that Frank Askin was instrumental in developing nationwide: voting rights law, and the necessity of using state constitutions rather than the US Constitution to advance civil liberties and human rights. Finally, today's program will focus on Frank's extraordinary life, his formative years, and his decades-long relationship with the ACLU, which began in the 1960s. To start us off with the program, Marilyn Askin, Frank's wife of 60 years, will discuss Frank's early life, Frank's activism in the fledgling civil rights movement, and how Frank found his way to Rutgers Law School, which he stayed teaching in for over 50 years. Marilyn, a legal lion in her own right, will be awarded this year's Eric Neisser's Public Interest Award at the end of our formal program. You will hear more about her path-breaking career when she receives the award. So now I turn you over to Marilyn Askin.
He was raised in Baltimore, and he was an activist in Baltimore. And he had started college in Baltimore, but he quit college to become a community organizer. And he used to organize sit-ins on the tennis courts in Baltimore because it was still a Jim Crow city. And the sit-ins were to permit Blacks to play on the tennis courts. And he did other things as a community organizer, but he became very, very political in Baltimore. And the only ones in the 40s, you know, during the McCarthy era that would embrace his politics was the left wing, and dare I say, the communists. So he got involved with the youth movement, the Labor Youth League, and became editor of a magazine called New Challenge. And he ended up moving to New York. He moved to Brooklyn, and he was the editor of New Challenge. And he was the boss of Lorraine Hansberry, because Lorraine Hansberry worked at New Challenge at the time. And it was interesting, he loved to regale me with the stories of how he used to sit at her home in the Village with her husband, Bob Nemiroff at the time, and the DeLugoffs, who later started the Village Gate. And while they were discussing politics and New Challenge, she was reading them excerpts from The Raisin in the Sun, which she was writing at the time. So that was all very, very exciting. Oh, I didn't tell you about our marriage. We had to elope initially because we worked at the same newspaper. And in those days, married people could not work together. So we eloped, we kept it secret. Of course, mom and dad carried the ladder because they loved Frank. And I went to the publisher and said, you know, publisher, it was Donald Borg. Frank and I have been married, and this newspaper still stands. So at that point, we had a religious ceremony at Rodolph Sholem in New York by a rabbi who was on McCarthy's list of traitors. And it was a love, and that's when we, you know, invited the world to come to our celebration.
Was the FBI at that celebration?
The FBI pervaded our lives from the days that Frank was a teenager in Baltimore. they kept records on him. And, they surveyed him all the time. But then when he moved and started getting respectable, they tried to get him kicked out of the Star Ledger. They sat down with Rutgers Law School to talk to the powers that be about his background, but Dean Heckel wouldn't hear any of it. So Dean Heckel fought for Frank. And, but at that point, the FBI would send out somebody to surveil us once a year. We were there, and I was with you kids at the Rotunda swimming pool, which was right near the colonnades and on the border of the North Ward and the Central Ward when the uprising began. And Frank, we needed money because I was, then working, I was doing public relations for the house, but he was working nights at the Star Ledger. And Saturday night, he would have to sneak out of Newark because there was a curfew to get to New York, where he worked on the desk of the New York Post. It was, an exciting time. Frank got out of law school, was on the faculty, and volunteered to help people who were being arrested in the riots. And one of his clients, in fact, was Tom Hayden, and for picketing outside of the A&P in Newark. But that matter was never resolved. It's still on the books. But he goes into court, and he came home and said, Marilyn, it's terrible. All the defendants were Black, and all the lawyers were white men. And this was in Newark Municipal Court. So he resolved that he wanted to change that. And Willard Heckel, the wonderful dean of Rutgers Law School at the time, saw his potential and appointed him head of the minority student program. There were no minority students. When I went to law school, there was one Black student there. Oh no, two. One Black from East Orange and Al Slocum, who was a classmate of mine. But otherwise, there were no Blacks. And Frank, with his ambition, with his energy, got very active in starting up the minority student program and had, support from many on the faculty for that. And the program eventually became a model for the nation. He, in 1982, he had, done some work in Washington. He worked very closely with House Labor Management Committee because Senator Thompson out of, Trenton was there, and we were very friendly with him. And he worked in Washington, was commuting. I think he may have taken some kind of sabbatical, but we got Washington fever. Potomac fever, we called it. And so he, in 1982, decided to run for Congress in our district. We were living in, I think we started in Newark, and then we were in West Orange. And he ran in the Democratic primary against a longtime blue-collar Democrat, Joe Minish, who was very conservative. So Frank decided to run in the primary against him. And he had the backing and endorsement of all the good people, the nurses, the social workers, the peaceniks, and everything. But at the end of the primary, he carried only 2 districts, Montclair, which is notoriously liberal, and believe it or not, Franklin Lakes, where there are a handful of Democrats. But I worked with the Republican chair professionally, and she got all her Democratic friends to vote for Frank. So those were the only two districts he carried. And he started in '86. We became members of the American Contract Bridge League. He took it up with a vengeance. We went to bridge camp. We went to summer camps. We went all over the country. We went to nationals. We even played in a national with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. It was a very, very exciting time. And till this, well, I shouldn't say till this day, until the pandemic, Frank and I in Florida were playing 4 or 5 times a week of duplicate bridge, and it kept our minds active.
Thanks a lot, Marilyn, for those wonderful reminiscences, and thanks to Johnny Askin for helping to produce the video. So let's move on with our program now. It really is a really very good one. I'm going to introduce our speakers just briefly before they speak. Everyone who is a speaker is incredibly well accomplished. As I said, we have an embarrassment of riches for alumni who are just doing amazing things. Our first speaker is one of these alumni whose CV goes on for miles and miles. So I will just pick out the highlights of his very illustrious career. Our first speaker is Lennox Hines, and he is a 1972 graduate of the law school, and he's professor emeritus of law and the former chair of the Administration of Justice program at Rutgers University. He graduated from City College before he came to Rutgers and ultimately received its highest honor, the Townsend Harris Medal for outstanding postgraduate achievement in his chosen field. In addition to his practice as a criminal defense and international human rights lawyer, he was, and get this, Nelson Mandela's personal attorney in the US to the government of South Africa, the African National Congress of South Africa, and SWAPO of Namibia. He is the permanent representative to the United Nations for the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. Lennox Hines has written and lectured extensively throughout the world on international human rights issues and on the impact of racism in the operation of the law, particularly in the criminal legal systems of the US. He has presented expert testimony on the crimes against humanity of the apartheid regime before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa that was presided over by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He's a former vice president of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers and is admitted to practice law throughout the world. Lennox Hines is one of the very few US-based attorneys appointed to the panel of defense lawyers by the United Nations. He has served on international commissions of inquiries and worked for the release of political prisoners in Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. And I now turn over the stage to our very own Lennox Hines.
Thank you, Penny. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, comrades and friends, old and new. Thank you, Penny, for your warm introductory remarks. Thank you, Marilyn, Steve, and Jonathan for inviting me to participate in this memorial to my comrade and friend, Frank Askin. Friends, whatever I say today or tonight will not do justice to the complexity, the depth, and the remarkable accomplishments of Frank Askin. Frank Askin's legacy extends beyond the classroom or beyond the courtroom, and you will hear from many of his colleagues of his legacy in the courtrooms. But Frank constantly linked the battles that took place in the courtroom with the battles that were taking place in the streets. All of Frank's energies have been dedicated to ensuring the dignity of every woman, the dignity of every child, and the dignity of men in the world, and to ending the scourge of racism. Frank Askin was not only a gifted jurist, not only an inspiring professor, or an undaunted fighter against evil. He was also the most remarkable man I knew, whose optimism in the power of the people renewed my faith that change is possible, that justice is attainable, and that each individual's life can make a difference. Friends, I feel particularly fortunate tonight because I was able to share publicly with Frank while he was still alive what I am sharing with you tonight. Many times we are called upon to speak at memorials, and we say the things that we actually feel about the person who has passed. But we never had the opportunity to tell them this while they were alive. I was able to do so with Frank. And it was done at the occasion of the 50th anniversary celebration of the minority student program that he helped usher into existence here at Rutgers Law School. As I reflect back over the last 52 years, when I decided to change careers from research science to the law. At that time, I had spent 12 years working in the field of analytical chemistry, first in pharmaceutical research, and then in petrochemical research. Time will not permit me to share with you tonight the reasons why I decided to change careers from science to the law. However, I can emphatically tell you that I would not have been admitted to Rutgers Law School if it was not for Frank Askin and Dean Willard Heckel. Frank was a member of a three-person admissions committee comprising of 2 faculty members and a graduating Black law student. That student subsequently became a Superior Court judge here in New Jersey. His name was Joe Charles. The Minority Law Students Program was established in the year earlier, in 1968. My colleague, retired Administrative Judge Savannah Potter, will share more information about Frank's role in the formation of the Minority Students Program. Even today, as I am speaking with you, I am not sure how the admissions committee and Willard Heckel decided to admit me into Rutgers Law School, because as quietly as it's kept, I adamantly refused to take the LSAT exam. I insisted that after the years I've spent as a research scientist, no LSAT exam could in fact predict my ability to be successful in law school. And I was adamant about it. Willard Heckel said, Lennox, look, go to Princeton, sit down, take the exam book, write your name on it. You don't have to write anything in it, and leave. That's what I did. Today, I do not know what criteria was used to admit me into law school, but I know that Frank Askin was one of the members of the admissions committee that interviewed me, and Willard Heckel was also instrumental in my admission. In the fall of 1969, during my first year at Rutgers Law School, the Black students served an indictment on the law school, challenging the very structure of the law school and demanding fundamental structural changes in the law school curriculum. There was a fierce battle and struggle, which resulted in the closing down of the law school while the issues were debated. While most of the faculty were alarmed and demanded that Dean Heckel take drastic and punitive action against us, it was Frank Askin and Arthur Kanoy who joined our ranks and championed our cause during the many emergency faculty meetings. The faculty ultimately decided to form what was called a tripartite committee, comprising of 6 faculty members and 6 students. 3 students were appointed from the Student Bar Association, and 3 students were appointed from the Association of Black Law Students. Among the faculty members on the tripartite committee who pioneered the sweeping structural changes at the law school were Frank Askin, Arthur Kanoy, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There were other faculty members who served on a rotating basis. Dean Heckel was the first dean who was on the tripartite committee, and then followed by his successor, Dean Paul. Al Slocum, Ron Hooks, and myself served as representatives of the Association of Black Law Students. Frank Askin was one of the key architects in developing clinical course offerings at the law school that served as a model across the United States. The tripartite committee also developed interdisciplinary courses and joint degree programs with other on those issues, dealing with joint degree programs and interdisciplinary programs, meeting with the deans of many of the other schools in the School of Science, Arts and Sciences. On a personal note, after I graduated from law school, I served for 5 years as the National Director of the National Conference of Black Lawyers of the United States and Canada, before joining the faculty as an associate professor in the School of Science program in criminal justice. Frank Askin and Arthur Kanoy were members of a university-wide committee appointed by the New Brunswick provost, which recommended me for tenure in 1980 and later on to the rank of a professor. In 2015, Frank recommended me to receive the Arthur Kanoy Award, together with Donna Lieberman of the ACLU. I am eternally grateful to Frank as a friend, as a colleague, and a comrade. He has been an inspiration to me as I have tried cases internationally. I spent 12 years as lead defense counsel before the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, where I defended those charged with genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. And Frank was an inspiration during those 12 years in the wilderness in Arusha, Tanzania. Frank has been an inspiration to me as I've argued cases across the United States. Thank you, Frank, for all that you have done. Thank you for your continuing struggle to make a difference in this world. And thank you for helping me during this period in maintaining your legacy. Thank you.
Lennox, thank you for those beautiful, beautiful words and your wonderful tribute to Frank. Our next speaker is Savannah Potter Miller, who graduated from Rutgers Law School in Newark in 1971. Savannah Potter Miller has served as an administrative law judge in Georgia, a trial attorney with the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, an assistant district attorney in Georgia, a special assistant attorney general for the Georgia Department of Law, and an assistant deputy public defender in New Jersey. In 1983, Savannah became the first African-American woman elected president of the Georgia Association for Women Lawyers. She has also been extremely active in the ABA and throughout her career has held multiple ABA leadership positions. She is currently serving as a delegate at large for the ABA House of Delegates. She also served as a member of the ABA Standing Committee on the Law Library of Congress Advisory Commission, as chair of the Women in the Criminal Justice Committee for the ABA Criminal Justice Section, in the ABA's Judicial Division, working to establish pro bono appellate civil appeals programs for all states, and the ABA's litigation section in a number of positions. Savannah is a member of the National Conference of Bar Presidents, a fellow of the American Bar Foundation, and also a founding member of the National Bar Association's Women's Division. It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you Savannah Potter Miller.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Penny? Okay, thank you so very much. And thank you, Marilyn, for this wonderful opportunity. And thank you, Penny, for this excellent introduction. I too joined Lennox Hines at the 50th anniversary celebration of the Minority Law Student Program, where I last saw Frank and Marilyn in 1968, and it was a tremendous tribute. In 1968, then Savannah Potter came to Rutgers University Law School on Amtrak, only at the young age of 20 years old, leaving Atlanta to come to Newark to attend Rutgers University School of Law. Professor Frank Askin's legacy has been personal to me, as he was the chair of the key faculty that comprised an honor roll of progressive lawyers during the tumultuous era in Newark, New Jersey. The Rutgers Minority Law School Committee, headed by Professor Frank Askin, expanded the student body to add 20 minority law students for the first year, 1968 to 1969. Out of those 20, 10 were from the South or from Southern undergraduate schools, and 10 were from the North or from Northern undergraduate schools. The next year, there were 40 minority students in the school population as a result of the successful completion of the majority of the 20 law students during my first year. Thus, the Rutgers University School of Law Minority Program was born, resulting in the graduation of hundreds of lawyers in the next 40 years. The formation of the Minority Law Student Program became the critical impetus for the creation of clinical legal education, as well as modification of the curriculum. You have, of course, heard that from Lennox Hines. The question is, at this point, what was the transforming result of Professor Frank Askin's leadership within the Minority Law Student Program and with the class of 1971? 5 examples I have to give to you today. Clinton Lyons became the president of the National Legal Aid and Defender Corporation and is presently president of the National Legal Aid and Defender Insurance Corporation. Ronald Hooks is regional director of the National Labor Relations Board. I think it's Region 18, and he is based in Seattle, Washington. Judge Golden Johnson, deceased, became the first minority African-American woman municipal court judge, and Judge Betty Lester became the second Superior Court judge in the state of New Jersey. Because of the vital influence of Professor Frank Askin, the founder of the Administrative Process Project, in cooperation with the New Jersey Civil Rights Division, I was later appointed as an administrative law judge for the state of Georgia, and earlier as an administrative hearings officer for the state of New Jersey. Realizing the importance of pro bono representation, and after one of my daughters decided to start a career in the United States Army, I volunteered with the Veterans Pro Bono Consortium and represent veterans who are filing claims before the United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Because of the vital influence of Dean Heckel, Professor Frank Askin, and the motherly spirit of Assistant Dean Helen Hoffman, they honored a commitment to my father, the Reverend William Potter of Atlanta, to provide guidance and career placements for his daughter, who had left Emory University School of Law without his permission to come to the North. The result of their efforts was resulting in the change of my planned career to accept the appointment of the United States Attorney General's Honor Law Graduate Program at Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division following graduation. There I worked with a team assigned to the complex litigation pursuant to Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act in federal litigation in Oklahoma and in Texas, and the only woman on the team. Because of the vital influence of Dean Heckel, Professor Askin, and the motherly spirit of Assistant Dean Helen Hoffman, they honored their commitment to my father to take care of his daughter, and recommended me for a summer law school placement at a national law firm, then known as Pitney Hardin, Kipp and Such. Sometimes law students don't realize the importance of following the direction of their learned supervisors, such as Professor Askin, Dean Heckel, and Assistant Dean Hoffman. On that particular occasion, eventually I did, because they placed me in a corporate law firm that was an incredible assignment, and that same law firm represented Rutgers University in the Daugherty versus Rutgers lawsuit having to do with the continuation of the minority law student program. So in conclusion, there are two other points that I'd like to bring to your attention. Professor Askin, Dean Heckel, and Assistant Dean Hoffman recognized and respected family involvement and accepted family involvement in the well-being and of the minority law student program. And finally, Professor Askin, Dean Heckel, and Assistant Dean Hoffman established student support teams. Those student support teams were not just of the minority law students, but they attracted majority students to work with us. And we developed teamwork, the kind of teamwork that we needed to know how to develop, that we subsequently established and led us to other characteristics and development of our professional life. So in conclusion, not only have you heard of the history of the minority law student program and the tripartite commission from Professor Hines, the legacy of Professor Askin to the minority law students in my class, the first class, was of such that it would take volumes to write. We certainly appreciate this opportunity to make this presentation. And thank you very much, Marilyn. God bless.
Thank you so much, Savannah. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new. We can't move forward unless we fully understand our history. And thank you to both you and Lennox for telling us about it. Our next speaker is Susan Herman. She actually is the only one of our speakers who is not a Rutgers Law School graduate. We won't hold that against her, but we have adopted her as one of our own. Susan Herman is the inaugural Ruth Bader Ginsburg Professor of Law at Brooklyn Law School. Like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Frank Askin, Professor Herman served as general counsel to the American Civil Liberties Union. In October 2008, Susan Herman was elected as the 7th president of the ACLU, a position that she held until she stepped down in January of 2021. A noted scholar and author, Professor Herman's most recent book, Taking Liberties, the War on Terror and the Erosion of the American Democracy, which was published by Oxford, was awarded the Roy C. Palmer Civil Liberties Prize. She has discussed constitutional law issues on every possible media platform, including NPR, CNN, C-SPAN, NBC, MSNBC, PBS, and online venues. In the past few years, for her outstanding work, Professor Susan Herman has received awards from Barnard College, NYU Law School, Brooklyn Law School, Trinity College in Dublin, and the Japanese American Bar Association. Professor Herman twice has been named one of Crain's New York Business's 50 most powerful women in New York. Susan, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing about Frank of the ACLU.
Thank you, Penny, for that very gracious introduction and for the generous offer to include me in the Rutgers community. I first met Frank Askin on the ACLU National Board, which I joined in about 1988. But Frank preceded me by quite a while. He had been there since 1969, when he had been named by the ACLU of New Jersey to be their affiliate representative. And Frank, from a very early stage, became a leader of the ACLU, where his talents were very much recognized and appreciated. He was elected to serve the ACLU as corporate secretary from 1973 to 75. He was then elected to serve as a member of the executive committee. And as Penny was saying, then as one of the ACLU's elected general counsel from 1976 until 2014. For a while, Frank's co-general counsel was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, as you've heard, was Frank's colleague at Rutgers, and whom he rather fatefully introduced to the ACLU. And later on, I had the honor of becoming one of Frank's co-general counsel. When Frank stepped down from his general counsel position, as well as from the board in 2014, he was named as general counsel emeritus, the only person to have ever been awarded that honor, and that includes RBG herself. In addition to all those officer roles, Frank's passion for civil liberties led him to serve on a number of ACLU policymaking committees in many different areas: equality, free speech, corporate personhood. Frank was passionate, I think, about virtually every one of the ACLU's 14 areas of work in civil liberties and civil rights, including racial justice, as you've heard. But in his later years, Frank devoted most of his ACLU energy to trying to convince the ACLU to be more active in one of his most important areas, the area of democracy, voting rights, and campaign finance, where he never stopped trying to get the ACLU to take a position that was more like he thought was correct. I think Danita is going to talk some about his voting rights work. So Frank always regarded his job at the ACLU and his job at Rutgers as being part of his greater big mission. He envisioned him, he had the opportunity to teach his law students and also to involve them in his ACLU work in clinic, where they took many ACLU cases. So he sometimes liked to remark proudly around ACLU circles that he was actually an ACLU lawyer. He had just never been paid by the ACLU. So in addition to being a lawyer and committed to justice, Frank was also very much a dedicated educator. In addition to educating his law students, he also educated the general public through his writing including his many columns at the Star Ledger, which he enjoyed sharing with his ACLU colleagues and which we always enjoyed reading. Every time a big issue came up, Frank would post something saying, here's a column I just wrote about that. And usually, just getting exactly the right point. So Penny, as you were saying, Frank was a lion and he lived large. He visualized himself always as an ACLU leader, not just as a member of the choir. And he also visualized himself, as Marilyn was mentioning, as a member of Congress. Now, unfortunately, the people of New Jersey were not as perceptive as the ACLU board, so they didn't actually elect him to that position, but boy, they sure should have. But at the same time, while Frank had a sense of his own worth and his own commitment, he also retained a humility that was very much born of principle. In 2014, after 45 years as the leader of the national board, he voluntarily stepped down and gave up his seat, did not run for re-election, which he undoubtedly would have won, because he was committed to the idea of diversifying the board and allowing for new blood. And he gave up his own seat to do that. Not many people really, put their action where their mouth is. So you couldn't spend as much time with Frank as I did around all these meetings and not know how important his family was to him. Frank's fatherly pride is the reason that his son, Jonathan, is today my colleague at Brooklyn Law School. Hanging out with Frank around all these board meetings and executive committee meetings and general council meetings, he would regale me with tales of his great son, Jonathan, who was a fabulous communications lawyer and was flying around the country on private planes and doing such important work. So when I heard that my law school, Brooklyn Law School, was looking for someone to teach communications law, of course, having had this drummed into me, the first person I thought of was Jonathan. So I suggested his name, the law school hired him as an adjunct, and history was made. Jonathan was so impressive, in fact, Frank was right, that the law school ended up keeping Jonathan on full time. And Jonathan is now running a great clinic, which he invented and started called BLIP, B-L-I-P, the Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic, where he's now become a player, not just in the private planes, but in international academia and in the world of tech startups and hackathons. And like his father, he now has acolytes all over the place, the former students and people out in the tech world. Now, I first met Marilyn, I think around ACLU biennials, because Marilyn used to sing in the ACLU Freedom Follies. This was, song parodies, sort of like the Capitol Steps. To give you a couple of examples, one was the Bill of Rights, It Will Survive, to the tune of I Will Survive, or a version of Take the Money and Run that was about campaign finance. So I no longer remember which of those songs Frank and Marilyn wrote, but I sure remember Marilyn singing the songs. And I bet that Marilyn would actually remember some of those songs. And if you are lucky, Marilyn will sing some of them for you sometime. Just ask her. It shows her a tremendous fun. And I think, I participated myself in writing and singing some of these songs. But I think in addition to the being a lion, Frank also had a tremendous sense of fun and a tremendous sense of humor. I could also comment that Frank was beloved not only by his family and by his colleagues at Rutgers and all of his students. He was viewed around the ACLU with great admiration and affection. I liked to refer to Frank and Ron Chen as our Jersey boys. I was also at the ALS meeting in January of 2017 when Frank received a double honor. The ALS, the American Association of Law Schools, presented Frank with a clinical teaching award, and SALT, the Society of American Law Teachers, at the same meeting, honored him as a great teacher. So at the SALT dinner, the room was just packed with Frank's colleagues and counterpoints from law schools all around the country. The atmosphere was really warm and festive because it wasn't just another awards dinner. Frank was someone who everyone wanted to honor. And I have to tell you that I think the person who most enjoyed that evening was Frank. He did know how to have a good time. So I can tell you that I'm speaking not just for myself, but for so many people on the ACLU board and staff, including, I've noticed here with us tonight are Anthony Romero, who's the executive director of the ACLU, and Rob Remar, who's the treasurer and vice president of the ACLU. So the ACLU knew that the ACLU has never had a better friend than Frank Askin. So Marilyn and John, I want to tell you that we all share your loss. Frank was a lion, he was a pleasure, he was a treasure, and I'm delighted to be able to take part in honoring him.
Thank you, Susan, for your lovely, lovely remarks, and welcome to the Rutgers family. The next two speakers, I will introduce them separately before they speak, but they are my former students. And I am proud to introduce Danita Judge. She graduated from Rutgers Law School in Newark in May 2003. And she was the recipient of many, many honors and prizes, not only when she was a student, but also after her graduation. She was a Canoyce Davis Fellow. Upon graduation, she received one of the law school's most prestigious awards, the Judge Skelly Wright Prize. And she received the Eric Neisser Public Interest Award in 2008, which is the award that Marilyn Askin is receiving tonight. And she was awarded the Rutgers 250 Fellow Medal, which in celebration of Rutgers University's 250-year-old anniversary in November 2016. That is a big honor. Danita worked for many years as at the Advancement Project, Advancing Voting Rights. And she was a senior staff attorney there, and then she became the co-program director for the Power and Democracy program. She litigated many, many cases there around the country to protect voting rights. I just want to mention two of them because they were just, groundbreaking wins. In 2008, during the general election, she successfully challenged the removal of 650,000 disproportionately Black Ohio voters from the rolls. And those people were able to participate in electing our first Black president. And in 2016, she was co-counsel in the case NAACP versus North Carolina NAACP versus McRory, where she defeated various voter suppression tactics, including reinstating early voting and same-day registration in North Carolina and getting rid of very, very stringent photo ID requirements. So Danita, I turn the stage to you, and thanks for joining us.
And thank you, Penny, and thank you for your wonderful introduction. Good evening, friends. I am thrilled to be here and to have been asked to remember and bring my memories of Frank Askin. Professor Askin was my professor. He was also my friend. Frank was a legal giant, and I am proud to say that I stand on the shoulders of Frank Askin. You heard Susan Herman mention that Frank stepped down from the ACLU National Board because of the opportunity to increase equity, diversity, inclusion, and a culture of belonging on the national board. Frank Askin appointed me or recommended me for his seat. I have now held that seat for almost 12 years. I will be term limited out next year, as it should be, but to represent Frank in that role has just been one of the joys of my life. To know that he felt strong enough for me to take that seat. And so I just really want to just herald Frank for that, and certainly the ACL National Board for allowing me to step into his shoes. Frank in some ways to me was a Renaissance man. And when I think about that, I think about a Renaissance man as someone who is ahead of their time. And Frank Askin, in many ways, was ahead of his time. You heard them talk about his role in the minorities, developing the minority student program and some of the other things that he has done at the law school. But he also was ahead of his time in terms of voter suppression and democracy, and really thinking about the harm that was happening in our country, and particularly to Black and Latinx communities. In fact, in 2004, Frank brought a case. It was the NAACP, New Jersey NAACP case versus Harvey. And that case really dealt with, the issue was felony disenfranchisement. Frank had, recognized that our state-sanctioned racial profiling in New Jersey had resulted in disproportionate numbers of Black and Brown people being investigated and convicted in New Jersey. As a result, minorities were overrepresented in the criminal injustice system. State laws denied probationers and parolees the right to vote as a result of this denial of equal protection under the law. Because of this mass incarceration, as you can imagine, the opportunities for Black and Latinx voters or individuals to participate in the vote was very low, was significantly low. And so Frank challenged that. He wasn't successful in it, in that, and he went to the state Supreme Court on that issue. But I submit to you that what Frank did was the forerunner to the law that was signed last year by Governor Murphy that allows in New Jersey those individuals who were formerly incarcerated and who are on probation and on parole to vote. Frank would probably say, that's good, that's great, but it's not enough. Because Frank's goal was to guarantee that individuals who were incarcerated were also able to vote. So it wasn't only those who were no longer incarcerated, but he believed that, and as I believe, how extremely important it is in order to feel that you are a member of society to be able to participate in the franchise. So while Frank would be excited and happy, I'm sure he was, about what happened in New Jersey, I again submit that at this point, the case that Penny mentioned in terms of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which has taken up the issue on felony disenfranchisement with regards to incarcerated individuals, I'm sure that Frank would be on that side of the camp of a case 16 that he was part of 16 years ago, really coming before the commission now to really determine whether or not we are, this disenfranchisement of incarcerated persons really is a violation of equal protection of the law, not only in New Jersey, but in the United States. Another really cutting edge program that Frank was very much involved with was the Rutgers Voter Assistance Project. And if you participated in the litigation constitutional rights clinic, you had an opportunity to represent voters on election day. And in some ways, this is also a forerunner to movement lawyering, because the students, 2L students were responsible for intake, and the 3L students represented clients. Basically, individuals who showed up to vote and in Newark at that time and showed up to vote, and for whatever reason their names were not on the voter rolls, they could then go before a Superior Court judge and basically plead their case, represented by a 3L student, and basically, be able to say that they believe that they had registered to vote, they had attempted to register to vote, and if they were able to prove that and use the type of language that was really important at that time, then they were able to cast a regular vote. This was really in some ways really groundbreaking, because in 2004. After the Florida debacle in 2000, the Help America vote of 2002 was passed. Part of the Help America Vote Act was to provide for provisional ballots. Provisional ballots are basically that ballot that you vote rather than walking away and being turned away, as we know that hundreds of thousands were turned away in Florida. This is that last bite of the apple to really to be able to cast your vote. Unfortunately, in 2004, in Ohio had cast more provisional ballots disproportionately than any state in the nation. And I was actually covering Ohio at that time. I remember receiving a call from Frank Askin, And Frank was not quite familiar with the provisional ballots. And he asked me what I was seeing in Ohio. And at that time, the election had passed, but we saw all of these provisional ballots. We had made a FOIA request, and I actually started to look at those ballots. I started to go through the ballots one by one in the 5 largest Black counties in Ohio. And what I found and what I shared with Frank was that I was seeing where voters had showed up in mega polling places and had been directed to the wrong table. And because they had been directed to the wrong table, their vote was thrown out. And it was appalling. It was appalling to Frank. It became the right church, wrong pew type of issue, with regards to provisional ballots. And so what we were seeing is, while provisional ballots were that fail-safe measure, it was not working in the way that it should have. And that was one of the reasons that Frank really felt strongly about voters coming in, being represented by students and having that opportunity to plead their case and vote a regular ballot over a provisional ballot. I can't tell you, for someone who had studied under Frank and to have the opportunity to really, in some ways, school him, in some ways, in terms of provisional ballots, it meant a lot to me that he trusted me on it, and that he reached out to me in Ohio to talk about the provisional ballot issue. The other thing that Frank was also really concerned about in terms of our democracy was same-day registration. And in fact, in 2011, he brought a lawsuit on behalf of Rutgers students who were unable to register under the 21-day registration deadline. Basically, Frank argued that there was no legitimate reason to register during the 21-day period. You could register under this same day, and be able to prove your identity and vote a regular ballot. I know this issue. I'm intimately familiar with this issue because it was one of the bigger issues that we challenged in the North Carolina NAACP versus McCrory monster voter suppression case. Same-day registration was a huge issue. And while we were able to retain the same-day registration, in some instances, it was certainly diluted after the fact. But that Frank recognized these type of issues really before many people were talking about these issues, was really remarkable because Frank really wanted to guarantee that the students that he trained in the law school, in the clinic, that when they came out, they were able to take on some of the cutting edge issues. I like to say that, when I was in law school, I actually thought that I would end up in affirmative action. Grutter was the big case at that time. Affirmative action was huge. But voting rights found me. I didn't find them, they found me. And I became, that became my work. I was really happy to be able to share that type of work with Frank, and that he had such an interest in democracy, and certainly as it related to Black and Brown communities. The last time that I really spent any significant time with Frank was, of course, at the 50th anniversary, but I also had the honor of speaking on the day that he retired from Rutgers, and the Rutgers Clinic was named after Frank and Marilyn Askin. I am so honored again to have been a part of that and to be a part of this tonight. I am so thankful for Frank and for his leadership and his friendship, and also that he selected me a Canois Davis Fellow. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Danita, for your wonderful remarks and for the work that you do. And I forgot to mention that since 2019, Danita has been the Associate Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. Sorry about that, Danita. And I want to thank you for your for continuing to work with us in the clinical program. The next speaker is also a former student of both Frank and me. It's Jean Cicero. Jean graduated from Rutgers Law School in Newark in 2000. and was also a Conoy Public Interest Fellow. After graduating from the law school, she served as a law fellow at the ACLU of Alabama. Then she worked at a law firm for 3 years and then joined the staff at the ACLU of New Jersey in 2004. She has worked on a wide range of issues, including bettering prison conditions, racial justice issues, LGBTQ plus rights, voting rights, free expression, and reproductive health, everything under the sun. For the past 3 years, Jean Cicero has served as the ACLU New Jersey's legal director, where she leads a team of 12 lawyers who, along with the rest of the organization, work every day to protect and expand civil liberties and civil rights throughout New Jersey. Jean, welcome.
Thank you so much, Penny. It's such a tremendous honor to take part in this memorial and to hear all of the amazing stories about Frank and his legacy. There's not a week that goes by, and maybe not even a day, that his legal legacy is not foundational to the work of the ACLU of New Jersey and to work done by civil rights attorneys throughout the state and beyond. We just heard all about his dedication to voting rights and democracy, and I experienced that firsthand. When I was an undergraduate at Rutgers in New Brunswick in the 90s, he represented students who were encountering disenfranchisement efforts by the Middlesex County Clerk. And I think that's something he would do several times over the decades. And then as one of his clinical students, I worked on a case challenging discriminatory regulations that were preferring the two major parties. And then at the ACLU, we partnered with him on so many of the cases Danita described. Like the other speakers today, I'm one of many students who can credit Frank with helping to shape and support my career. I can so clearly remember being a second-year law student and sitting in the clinic offices back when the law school was at 15 Washington Street. And I remember being awed and more like scared by the responsibility we were being handed in working on these cases. But Frank created a place where students could learn from our professors and from each other, and they guided us in being creative and using the law as a tool for justice. And so he equipped so many of us to take up cases wherever our careers took us. So for me, Frank was first a professor, but then he became a role model, a mentor, an ally, a thought partner, and co-counsel. I saw that Frank one time said that one of his greatest contributions was creating a generation of public interest lawyers. And I'm proud to count myself among them, but a generation feels small, right? It's so many generations of us since the founding of the clinic in 1970. And I cross paths with them regularly. I see so many of you here tonight, and they've been mentors, friends, ACLU colleagues, and co-conspirators. It was when I was one of Frank's clinical students that I first appreciated that the New Jersey Constitution is a separate and independent source of civil rights. And so Frank credited Justice William Brennan with inspiring him to look at the state constitution as a way to protect civil rights and civil liberties. And it was a 1977 Law Review article that Justice Brennan, who was documenting the Supreme Court's narrowing approach to individual rights, called on state court practitioners and judges to turn to their state constitutions to protect people from the intrusions on their freedoms. And Frank heeded that call. He focused his attention on litigating in New Jersey courts and under our state constitution to not only protect civil rights, but to expand them. And the ACLU of New Jersey's litigation docket today mirrors that approach. Most notably, as it has been mentioned, Frank worked with his students, co-counsel, and the ACLU of New Jersey to change the legal landscape when it came to civil liberties in private spaces. And just as a reminder or primer, the First Amendment to the US Constitution says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the right of the people to peaceably assemble. And that has meant that people are protected from the government's efforts to silence us. But New Jersey's corollaries are different, they're affirmative. Every person may freely speak, write, and publish their sentiments. The people have the right freely to assemble. And Frank made sure that those differences in language meant something. And so in a case that became New Jersey Coalition Against the War in the Middle East versus JMB Realty, Frank represented groups seeking to end military intervention in the Persian Gulf who'd been turned away from leafleting at shopping malls. And I have to note on what an undertaking this case was. When I was looking at the opinion for today, I was struck by the comprehensive record that Frank and his team developed. They didn't just sue one mall, they sued 10 10 regional shopping malls, and they marshaled remarkable facts and data about how the malls operated and their economic and social role in the state. And just as someone who's involved in a case with multiple defendants right now, it's really a tremendous amount of work and a labor of love. And so at the heart of Frank's argument was that regional shopping malls had displaced downtown business districts, and they were functioning as town squares and hubs of commercial and expressive activity. And a majority of the New Jersey Supreme Court agreed. The court held that, quote, if the people have left for the shopping centers, our constitutional rights include the right to go there too, to follow them and to talk to them. And then it went on, we do not believe that those who adopted a constitutional provision granting a right of free speech wanted it to diminish in importance as society changed, to be dependent on the unrelated accidents of economic transformation, or to be silenced because of a new way of doing business. And you can almost hear Frank in those words, right? And so he took the idea that our rights should not be diminished by accidents of economic transformation to another growing way that our state was transforming. And that was with privately run common interest residential communities or homeowners associations. And he described these organizations as private governments because of how they mirror municipalities with the kind of control they can exercise over people who live there. And so in a string of cases with the ACLU and New Jersey Appleseed, Frank worked to establish that people who live in these private communities have state constitutional rights to free speech and to free and open elections. So his democracy work was kind of moving in that direction too. And so if you live in a community with a condo board or a homeowners association in New Jersey, you can place a political sign on your property thanks to Frank. And even today, that's not the case in the vast majority of states. And because of Frank's work, New Jersey's free speech protections have been described as broader than practically all others in the nation. And this work was underway when I was a student of Frank's at the Constitutional Litigation Clinic. And I can remember that Frank invited all of us to his home at the end of the semester for a meal. And knowing about his very strong feelings about how private communities operated, I was surprised to find that he lived in one. And it did make me wonder how his own experiences may have informed his work. And as I wrap up, I do have to say that the ACLU of New Jersey as an organization would not be who we are without Frank's leadership and partnership for more than 50 years. Last month, I happened to have a chance to see the original 1969 incorporation certificate of what would become the ACLU-NJ Foundation, which is the litigation arm of the organization. And Frank is one of its founding trustees. Because of Frank, our affiliate had a board policy supporting abortion rights in 1967, before the national board even. And because of Frank, our board came to a different conclusion than the National Board on Campaign Finance and supports prohibitions on contributions by corporations. And I'm sure there's so many examples of Frank's fingerprints in our board's minutes and policies. And so there's the board work. And then he, aside from the free speech work, he litigated so many significant cases in our history. In the aftermath of the Newark Rebellion, he represented people whose rights had been violated through unjust arrests and acts of police violence. He took on the secret dossiers kept by the Jersey City Police Department. And as you heard in the intro, he was fighting government surveillance on himself, but also on other activists. He laid the groundwork for so much of our ongoing work, including on policing and systemic racial discrimination, the elections, the free speech, all of it. This past Friday, my office filed a brief with at least 3 of Frank's case cited. And the Wednesday before that, we received a complaint about protesters who were forced to leave a sidewalk that is apparently private property. And I know this week, there will be other issues that come up or new arguments that will be developed, and they will rely on the legacy that Frank has left us. And that is such a blessing. So I'm so grateful to Frank and to Marilyn and to his family, friends, loved ones, and colleagues who supported him and his many, many endeavors for justice. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean, for those lovely words and for all the work that you do. So that concludes our speaker series. Now we're going to hear from our Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Frank himself before we turn to the awards portion of our ceremony. And anyway, this is really a fitting way to end and the tribute to Frank. So I turn it over to our producers to play the video.
Frank Askin was in the very first class I taught at Rutgers Law School. And as I anticipated, he was first in his graduating class.
By that fall, they were both on the faculty, and Frank was on his way to a 50-year life of teaching, breathing, living the law.
He cared about the right things, and he appreciated that law exists, or should exist, to serve a diverse society.
A commitment that began long before he was a lawyer. By high school, his focus was on social justice and radical left-wing politics.
When I grew up in the late 40s and early 50s, expressing extremist views meant you were for civil rights or against racial discrimination.
So by 18, he had an active FBI file.
I've been battling FBI for more than half a century, and I consider the FBI guidelines something of a charade.
And while the FBI was watching Frank, Frank was on his way to becoming a teacher, an advocate, a man described by colleagues, students, friends, like this.
There hasn't been a time since I have entered the legal profession in which Frank has not been my role model, my mentor, now my colleague.
Frank is my best friend. He is my mentor. He is my legal partner. He is, my inspiration.
He was my professor. He was my mentor, and he was my friend.
Or, as the ACLU's Ed Barocas puts it,
there are so many ACLU lawyers and civil libertarians generally that have Frank as their idol, and their teacher, their professor, their example of what being a great civil libertarian attorney means.
I vividly recall one day in the late 1960s, after Frank had become my colleague, when he brought a visitor to my office, Mel Wolfe, then legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union. That visit sparked an idea that eventually developed into the ACLU's Women's Rights Project, a venture that consumed my waking hours for the next decade. Frank and I served together for a time as general counsel to the ACLU.
And no one served as long in that post as Frank. So his input's been national, but nowhere greater than here at home.
We have here in New Jersey the strongest protections for freedom of speech. And that is because of Frank Askin.
Among other things, his opening up regional shopping malls in New Jersey to political petitioning.
The Paramount public place is clearly taken over what was once the town square or the village green in most parts of our state.
The leafleting case was a Frank success, but even when he lost,
if you're doing it right, you shouldn't always win.
He left an impression.
This case concerns a most fundamental issue of contemporary American society: the right of racial minorities to participate fully and effectively in the political process.
That was an appeal to end the ban on felon voting, with Frank as comfortable in the courtroom as in the classroom.
This was 25, 30 years ago.
Even when it was the state's Supreme Court or the nation's highest court, or even close to home, an early fight on behalf of Newark's black cops.
The police officers right here, no, we thought we were being treated in a racist manner.
So you find Frank?
We find Frank. Frank listened, and he decided to help us. He filed suit, and eventually we won.
Claude Coleman went on to be a lawyer, the director of police, and ultimately a Superior Court judge.
I was the only person that was a student of his, a client of his, and also a defendant of his, because he ends up suing me later on as head of the police department.
Everything he does is cleared with, he clearly does with the underlying assumption that injustice has to be fixed. It's not a question of whether he's able to or whether this is practical. It just has to be done.
That's what led him to a couple of stints on the Hill and 2 unsuccessful congressional campaigns,
I'm Frank Askin, and I'm asking for your votes.
but always returning to the law school, a base where lawyers like the iconic Arthur Kanoy and his dear friend Frank Askin could teach and try to change the world.
He is a firm believer that if the law is on your side, you can move mountains, and if the law is not on your side, then one should move mountains to change the law to do justice.
And so he began enlisting students to help.
So you think it's a freedom of the press issue? I do.
And created a constitutional litigation clinic, a critical addition to Rutgers and a model for law schools all over the country.
Very often law schools focus on describing what the law is. He focused on, and our clinic focused on, what the law can be.
Content discrimination angle, they can ban all journalists, but you can't ban specific journalists?
It's possible.
A place where students can go hands-on in the interest of civil rights.
I'm also thinking in terms of door-to-door canvassing and like freedom of speech infringements there.
And social justice.
Frank's pitch about his clinic is it's a course where students don't just study the law, they make the law. And then he amplifies on that at his first class where he says, you know, in most of the curriculum, what you're doing is you're looking at the law as it is, and you're asking the question why. But in this clinic, I want you to look at the law as it never was and ask why not.
So it's only fitting that what's grown to be an entire wing of Rutgers clinics will be named for Frank and for his wife of more than 50 years, the former Marilyn Klein. Like Frank, a former journalist, a lawyer, and a legal pioneer in the field of elder law.
She is a lion in her own right. Her work on elder law is some of the most important here in New Jersey.
She taught the course in elder law here for many, many years. That was very well received. And as she predicted, it has become a very discrete and important area of practice.
She essentially created the field of elder law. And as the baby boomer population continues to age, they will have the legal protections that are available to them courtesy of Marilyn Askin.
Marilyn is smart, outspoken, determined, like Frank, whose last weeks as the law school's most senior professor found him slower in body, but not in mind, doing what he's done for more than 50 years.
Residents of these private communities have rights under the state constitution, the only state in the nation.
Question, challenge, teach.
And those are a little uncertain.
Bravo, Frank, for your half-century of service to Rutgers and to the ideal of justice, genuinely equal and accessible to all. May you continue to advance that ideal in your life's next chapter.
It's very hard to be composed after watching that video tribute to Frank and to see him. Anyway, we'll move on with our program. As you saw, RBG had the highest regard for Frank, as did anyone who came into contact with him. Frank was part of a legal team. Frank and Marilyn Askin, both legal lions. John Dubin, a dean at the law school, will present an award to Marilyn Askin, the Eric Neisser Award, but I'd like to introduce John Dubin first. John Dubin has many titles and wears many hats at the law school. He is a Board of Governors Distinguished Public Service Professor of Law, the Alfred Clapp Scholar, an Associate Dean for Clinical Education and Access to Justice Opportunity Programs. He has been the Clinical Program Director at Rutgers Law School for the past 20 years. Dean Dubin and Frank Askin oversaw the expansion and institutionalization of our clinical program from 1999 until Frank retired just a few years ago. Under John's guidance, our clinical program is consistently recognized as one of the best in the country. Before joining Rutgers Law School, Dean Dubin worked at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, the ACLU, and was the director of litigation at the Harlem Neighborhood Office of the Legal Aid Society. He also worked as an assistant attorney general in the Civil Rights Division of the New York Attorney General's Office. John, I turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Penny. Thank you for that generous introduction. And my God, that due process segment gets me every time. It was my great honor to write the nominations and then go out to San Francisco in 2017 and introduce Frank for both the AALS Clinical Section's Pincus Career Clinical Education Accomplishments Award luncheon, and then at the SALT dinner the next day for the Great Teacher Award. And tonight, it's my great honor as well to introduce the next two award recipients and next two awards at this function. Now, every year at First Monday, we honor a Rutgers Law alumnus with the Eric Neiser Award for accomplishments in public service and public interest law. This year's recipient is way, way, way overdue for this award. It's the remarkable Marilyn Askin. As we just saw in that due process segment, Marilyn has been recognized as the founder of elder law in New Jersey, its most important proponent in the state and a giant of elder law in the nation. She virtually created this field from scratch in New Jersey, and accounts of her work in the field are legion and legendary. Marilyn graduated from Rutgers in the class of 1970, and after periods of work with the American Jewish Congress, the New Jersey Public Defender, and as staff counsel to the Public Documents Commission, Marilyn commenced her focus on elder law when she became an attorney with Essex Newark Legal Services in 1977. Her legal services staff counsel job was a new position designed to provide free legal services for persons over the age of 60 through a temporary grant from the Federal Older Americans Act. Her unit eventually grew to handle the legal problems of more than 1,000 clients a year and to meet a huge and growing demand for elder legal services. Marilyn trained retired attorneys so that fewer clients would be turned away. She trained community residents and paralegals for clients needing access to public benefits at the application stages, and she saw the need for the private bar to become more engaged as well. When she approached the New Jersey Bar Association with an idea to create a law and aging committee in 1983, she was told by Bar Association leaders that, well, you know, the bar's trust and estates section can handle the legal problems of older adults. Her response was to redouble her efforts to demonstrate that elder law entailed much more than the law of dying in the afterlife. She convinced the Institute for Continuing Legal Education to promote a program which she called, quote, elder law, it ain't just wills. And it was repeated throughout New Jersey to overflow audiences, which gained visibility and recognition for the elder law movement, which she launched. She obtained a Federal Older Americans Act grant to finance the first elder law teaching and seminar at Rutgers Newark. You heard former Dean Chen speak of it. She taught elder law for 28 years and saw several of her students embrace the practice upon graduation. During her first year, her students submitted to the legislature the first living wills legislation in New Jersey, and also prepared proposals in later years concerning guardianships to legal problems of aging athletes, problems of aging prisoners, and a program with private bar assistants to help aging veterans. Marilyn also handled an elder law private practice for several years, and then was solicited to become president and chief legislative counsel for the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP, in New Jersey, a position she held until her retirement in 2015. In her work as a lobbyist for AARP, Marilyn had the opportunity to advance justice for older Americans on a much larger scale through wide-ranging legislative reforms. She was famous for tirelessly walking the halls of the legislature in Trenton to shepherd legislation that benefited older Americans. As a result of her efforts, she received 25 pens from the New Jersey governors when they signed statutes she had successfully navigated through the legislature. Marilyn also literally wrote the book on elder law in New Jersey, publishing several important and informative books advancing the field, including the ABCs of elder law made easy, long-term planning, the basics and beyond, and others. He was also a special editor for New Jersey Lawyers Elder Law periodical and worked on the editorial board of New Jersey Lawyer magazine on these issues. Throughout the course of her distinguished career, Marilyn's reputation earned her recognition by her peers as being a founder and champion of New Jersey elder law. She received recognition by New Jersey Governor Jim Florio, who proclaimed May 12th as Law Day for Senior Citizens in 1993, and specifically recognized Marilyn's contributions in the development of elder law as a specialty in the state. Marilyn was also publicly acclaimed by Governors McGreevey, Corzine, and Cody, as well as Senator Frank Lautenberg. Finally, Marilyn has been the recipient of numerous prestigious honors for her expertise and leadership. In 2000, she was among the first recipients of the Professional Lawyer of the Millennium Award, which the New Jersey Bar instituted in the year 2000. She was bestowed with the Distinguished Service Award by the New Jersey Institute for Continuing Education in 2002. The New Jersey Trial Lawyers Bar presented her with its Presidential Award for Advocate of the Year in 2009. She also received the Salute to the Policymakers Award by the Executive Women in New Jersey, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys Award in 2008, and was the awardee of the Essex County Bar Association's Community Service Award in 1982. In 1993, she was recognized by the New Jersey Division on Aging and New Jersey State Bar as the outstanding provider of legal assistance to older people in recognition of her contributions to the development of elder law in the state of New Jersey. And in 2008, the Elder and Disability Law section of the New Jersey Bar formally created the annual Marilyn Askin Lifetime Achievement Award, and she was its first recipient in recognition of her role in the development of elder law as a recognized self-contained area of law in New Jersey. So you can see why we believe she is well overdue for recognition here at Rutgers for her extraordinary career of public service and public interest law at Rutgers Law School, and with our Eric Neiser Award for accomplishments in public service and public interest law. So without further ado, I present the 2021 Eric Neiser Award, albeit virtually, to the remarkable Marilyn Askin, Rutgers class of 1970.
Hi, can I talk? Thank you. Thank you very much. I hadn't prepared anything. I would be remiss, however, if I did not talk about our 3 children and our 2 grandsons, who were the pride of Frank. I went to law school with a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 3-month-old. My 4-year-old was Andrea, and she became the surrogate mother for her 2 younger brothers because I was off in the library studying at the law school. I went into law school right after Danny was 3 months old. So Andrea, was the pride of Frank. He would go around when, first of all, his mother had 3 sons and 9 grandsons. And when Andrea was born, this was the first girl in the family. And he used to carry her around and sing, "Thank heaven for little girls." And she was the pride of his joy. Unfortunately, she died 3 years ago prematurely, but I could not have gone to law school. Andrea did not take care of her 15-month younger brother. She was older by 15 months. And then 3 years passed. Danny was born exactly 9 months after Frank's bar exam. That was the timing. And Andrea was the surrogate mother for these kids, and they loved her dearly. Frank loved them, and they produced two wonderful grandsons, Jacob, who was also a Rutgers grad, and Sammy Askin, who is a hockey player. What can I say? He's a marvelous, marvelous hockey player, and that's Danny's son. And so Frank, his family, was the pride and center of his life. And while you talk about all these other achievements, it was his family that made him alive. So thank you for the award. And I'm not going to, go into or bore people about my accomplishments, which I did, because that's why I went to law school in the first place. You remember in the 60s, Chief Justice Earl Warren told us when we were in the streets picketing, if you want to change the law, go to law school. And so Frank went, and as soon as he got out, I went also. And our purpose was never to make money in the law, but to change the law, to make the world a better place. And I hope we've contributed a little modicum to that. So thank you very much. And I love Rutgers Law School. It's a great place for humankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Are we back to me? Can everyone hear me?
We're back to you, John, to present the next.
Okay. Thank you, Marilyn. I think you can, what's the definition of a power couple? Forget about Brangelina. I'm thinking of Franklin or something like that. We have to come up with an acronym for this extraordinary couple and their accomplishments here, Frank and Marilyn. Well, as you heard from the extraordinary Lennox Hines tonight, one of Frank Askin's great accomplishments at Rutgers was his work as the principal actor in launching the Rutgers clinical program, from his leadership on the tripartite commission that supplied the blueprint for the law school's extensive and first clinical programs, and then through his creation of the first such clinic, the Constitutional Litigation Clinic, as its founder and director over the next almost 50 years. And Frank's clinic was a product of the time. It's a large case impact litigation law change clinic like no other in the country that would actually immerse law students in work on the major vexing constitutional and social justice issues of the day in the turbulent late 60s and early 70s. It was a visionary, creative, clinic in both a function of the times, and as Danita Judge pointed out, Frank and his clinic were ahead of their times. The clinical program he launched and his mentorship and example also provided inspiration for many Rutgers law alums who went on to become civil rights lawyers, but also many who went on to become clinical professors and important contributors to clinical education. That's a significant part of Frank's legacy too. Jean Cicero mentioned a generation of civil rights lawyers, like what we've seen tonight, like Danita and Jean, that Frank inspired. Well, there's also a generation of clinical teachers inspired by the program he created. So last year, we had planned a national conference around the 50th anniversary of our clinical program, which was ultimately postponed indefinitely by COVID. But in my last communication with Frank shortly before the start of the pandemic, I discussed with him our desire to launch a new annual alumni award at the 50th anniversary function in his name to honor an alumnus for contributions to clinical education and clinical teaching, just as we honor an alum for public interest law accomplishments with the Nicer Award. Frank was both extremely flattered and thrilled with the idea. And who else would we name such an award after other than the father of clinical education at Rutgers after his remarkable 50-year career at it, Frank Askin from the class of '66. But since we didn't have that 50th anniversary function yet because of COVID, we thought it fitting to both announce the creation of this new award and make the first award today of the Frank Askin Alumni Award for Accomplishments in Political Education at this function. So our first and inaugural recipient of this award, like Frank, is a pioneer in political education who has created a visionary, creative, new model of a clinic, also responsive to the times. I was going to try to keep the recipient's identification somewhat under wraps till the end, but Susan Herman's wonderful comments tonight may have made it obvious. We'll see. In the 14th or 15th year of this clinic, our recipient has been the founder and director of a technology-focused clinical program representing small tech, internet, and media-based startups, providing vast and wide-ranging representation modeled to the unique circumstances and needs of these small emerging entrepreneurs. And our recipient brought experiences and expertise in internet law, transactional representation, and public policy, as well as some experience in civil rights and public interest law, having had an extraordinary career in public and private settings after graduating from Rutgers and before entering clinical law teaching. These experiences included clerking for the Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court, working as policy counsel for the Federal Communications Commission in DC, in the White Shoe law firm of Davis, Polk, and Wardell, as an assistant public advocate for the state of New Jersey, as president and general counsel for a telecommunications development corporation focused on joint venture projects to build and operate wireless voice data and video delivery systems in third world and developing countries, as president and general counsel for the National Trade Association that represents telecommunications carriers, as president and general counsel of another company focusing on incubating web and internet-based startups, and as chairperson for the Obama for America Presidential Campaign's Internet Governance Working Group and Technology, Media, and Telecom Committee, among other positions. This diverse confluence of legal and professional experiences led our recipient to create the nation's first incubator and policy law school clinical program in 2007 to 2008. This clinic's path-breaking work has been chronicled in a range of periodicals such as Forbes, the Huffington Post, and multiple technology publications. The HuffPost profile described this clinic as followed, quote, "The clinic functions as a full-service tech-oriented law firm leading its students through the full sweep of transactional law, policy, and politics, technology, and entrepreneurship necessary in a web-enabled world to provide pro bono legal help to tech startups that really need it. The goal? Training the lawyer 2.0 for the digital era. This legal incubator and policy clinic is a legal outpost of the boundary of old and new. As the world catches up to web companies, government, and ordinary web users, we're grappling with unfamiliar issues regarding privacy, transparency, communication, and more. The current crop of attorneys have to deal with the overwhelming amount of information freely available on the web, as well as the complicated and unforeseen legal quandaries that develop as a result. The startups the clinic assists will be the pioneers of future corporate structures, even as the innovations they introduce to the digital infrastructure continue to morph the human experience." And then the article goes on to describe the students' adoration and virtual cult-like following of this clinic and its director. And the director's vision and influence is not merely national, but it's global too, as the founder and director of a consortium of European law schools that are representing similar European startups in 12 European law schools, including schools in London, Amsterdam, and Hamburg, and as president of the Global IP Alliance. Finally, the director's self-description of the clinic is of a clinic which includes a focus on, and I'll quote, "policy reform in the digital age that represents bootstrapped startups pursuing socially virtuous missions, implicating novel issues that the law has not anticipated." It is part of an overall goal of using technology to advance the law and legal process and to try to morph the law to better suit the needs of vulnerable and marginalized communities in the digital age. In short, it is a new wave, new age clinic and clinical focus. It's not your father's clinical program, and it's not his father's clinical program either. So with that background, it's my great pleasure and honor to extend the inaugural Frank Askin Alumni Award for accomplishments in clinical education to an extraordinarily accomplished alum from the Rutgers Newark Law School class of 1990, the dynamic, visionary, pioneering founder and director of the Brooklyn Law School's popular clinic, the Brooklyn Incubator and Policy Clinic known as BLIP, Jonathan Askin.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Well, to be candid, this is probably the honor I will cherish above any other past or likely future. Now, I've got to ask the question whether or not my name reminded you of someone else when you were thinking about who to give the award to, or perhaps it was done alphabetically. We'll see next year if the person who gets the award starts with a B. Demet, maybe that's you. So I got to tell you the truth. Dad never quite got what I was doing. When I was pursuing internet ventures and sort of ran away from the civil rights, civil liberties work. But I've got to tell you, one of my dirty secrets is that I pretty much stole Dad's idea and polished it with a digital overlay. This weekend we saw the launch of the Many Saints of Newark. I haven't seen it yet. Don't tell me how it ends. Don't tell me if Tony Soprano dies in the early version. This is not that story of Newark. This is the story of the true saints of Newark. My teachers, the Rutgers administration, my student colleagues, and in particular, the clinical faculty. I was to be candid, I was a bit of a wayward child. I strayed from my parents' mission before law school and a little bit after law school. After Dad lost his congressional bid, I sort of gave hope on quixotic dreams that could triumph in American political process, and I went to Vegas to play poker. But Rutgers brought me back home. And I got to tell you, I loved my doctrinal classes. They were wonderful, but I found myself, my head, my heart, my soul, my purpose, my mission in the clinics at Rutgers. I was fortunate, I guess, that there was a moment when Dad took a leave from Rutgers and I had the good fortune to take the Rutgers Constitutional Litigation Clinic. I think there might have been some issues if Dad was still running it. And that opened my eyes to my dad's life in a way I hadn't really seen as a child. You know, he would come home every day and say, "I can't believe they pay me to do this." I thought he was saying that because it was fun. I didn't realize he was saying it because it gave him meaning in his life. So the clinics are where I found my home. And frankly, I did the urban justice clinic under Lou Raveson, and that was my passion. Lou taught me how to think outside the box, that lawyers can do things that don't fit within the four corners of the box. And that gave me the courage to take my law degree and use it as a sword in the real world. So I got to tell you, I was a civil rights, civil liberties lawyer for a time, and I didn't love it. And I think in large part, I didn't love it because I felt like I was forever going to be living in my parents' shadow. So I tried to stake out my own claim in the world, and I was lucky enough that the internet was just happening come the mid-90s, and Congress had just passed the Telecommunications Act. And I saw this as the great moment in my life, a moment where a young lawyer could leapfrog into the profession and do amazing things. So that's what I did. I jumped in and tried to create the rules of the road to govern the internet and the digital economy and digital society for the next several decades. And then all of a sudden, my issues and Dad's issues were joined. All of the battles that my dad had fought 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s were now emerging online. So I thought, here's my opportunity to steal Dad's vision and do what he can't do, My dad didn't know how to turn on his laptop. So and frankly, the ACLU was a backwater in the early 90s when it came to digital rights, which is why I think the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Public Knowledge and other organizations found their footing. Now, the ACLU is obviously at the forefront of digital rights at this point, but I saw my niche and I grabbed it and decided I would take my combined knowledge of civil liberties, of constitutional law, and of the internet and apply it to create. Now, my dad always talked about how Thurgood Marshall and William Brennan always talked about the Constitution as this living, breathing document for the ages. When Brooklyn Law School asked me to create an IP clinic, they thought I was going to create an intellectual property clinic. But I thought, like my dad, I was going to create a clinical program that was going to live and breathe for ages to come. And that meant we were going to morph with the times. We were going to try to morph the law to better suit the needs of a digital society, and otherwise to use technology tools to advance access to justice and that noble mission. So that's where I came out, and I owe it all to Rutgers, the champions at Rutgers who trained me and taught me. My only wish is that Dad were here to see this. He did give me my diploma. This would be a nice follow-up to that. Love you all. Thanks.
Thanks, Johnny. Well deserved. Well deserved. You too, Marilyn. It's great to see you both. We're going to continue with our celebration of Frank's life and his living legacy. We're going to have an open mic period where people can raise their hands and speak about Frank. We ask that people keep their comments to 2 to 3 minutes. And to start us off, we have one of Frank's former students and an alumni of the Constitutional Litigation Clinic, who will start off the open mic period with a song. Bennett Zorovski, who graduated from the law school in 1979, has a solo practice in Montclair, New Jersey, devoted to unions, employees, and the Constitution. Bennett served as co-counsel with Frank on a number of clinic cases involving free speech and war powers. Bennett is also a folk singer who has sung with the Askins at several functions. Bennett directed the Solidarity Singers of New Jersey, of the New Jersey Industrial Union Council on picket lines and at many progressive events for more than 26 years. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Bennett and to continue celebrating Frank Askin, the man we all love.
It's an honor to be able to sing for Frank once again. I sang with him on several occasions over the years, and I know that he kind of shared the view that nothing builds movements as much as singing together. So I'm hoping that you'll all sing along with me, although because we're on Zoom and it has these terrible delays, you have to stay muted and imagine that everybody is with you, but you can see them on the screen. This is a traditional movement song derived from the Black church. May the work that I have done speak for me. If you've never heard it, it's easy to learn because you repeat the same line 3 times. Then the last 2 lines are always the same. If I fall short of my goal, someone else will take a hold. May the work that I have done speak for me. May the work that I have done speak for me. If I fall short of my goal, someone else will take a hold. May the work that I have done speak for me. May the lawyers I have taught speak for me. May the lawyers I have taught speak for me. May the lawyers I have taught speak for me. If I fall short of my goal, someone else will take a hold. May the lawyers that I taught speak for me. May the clinics I helped build speak for me. May the clinics I helped build speak for me. May the clinics I helped build speak for me. If I fall short of my goal, someone else will take a hold. May the clinics I help build speak for me. May the precedents I set speak for me. May the precedents I set speak for me. May the precedents I set speak for me. If I fall short of my goal, someone else will take a hold. May the precedents I set speak for me. May the movements that I served speak for me. May the movements that I serve speak for me. May the movements that I serve speak for me. If I fall short of my goal, someone else will take a hold. May the movements that I serve speak for me. And the last verse is the first. May the work that I have done speak for me. May the work that I have done speak for me. May the work that I have done speak for me. If I fall short of my goal, someone else will take a hold. May the work that I have done speak for me, speak for me. Thank you very much, especially all those who sang along. And I turn it over to, I'm not sure who.
It's still me, Bennett. Bennett, that was beautiful. Thank you so very much. Very, very moving, and how appropriate. So I will call on people and in the order in which their hands were raised, but I want to start first with Steve Askin, Frank's eldest son. Steve, thanks for joining us. And it's funny, I see your image and you look just like Frank, at least your 2-inch version that I see on the top of my screen looks exactly like Frank. And after that, we'll turn it over to Professor Paul Trachtenberg. Steve.
And I have to say, and some people notice this perhaps, there was a situation when somebody phoned me while my dad was in the house. He answered the phone and he said, it wasn't me, it was him. They believe it because I'm told we sound alike. Anyhow, since I am not a lawyer, I really had to ask myself, what could I say that would interest this audience? So I promise I'm not going to tell you what a wonderful grandfather he was, even though up there in the corner of my office, I could show you a sweet picture of him with the grandkids. And I certainly won't tell you how he pointed me toward my career in union organizing when he brought me to a picket line in a stroller with a sign that said, "Please don't break my daddy's strike." Instead, I'm going to tell you folks about a legal triumph you've never heard of. And it's from the time that my dad served as my attorney. And I want you to think back to 1970. I was a high school senior. Anyone my age or older could guess how my classmates and I spent our senior year, especially after the Kent State and Jackson State massacres. We were marching through the streets of New York to protest the Vietnam War. We were not spending much time in class. Somehow, I got to school often enough to keep my grades up. But that was not enough for my English teacher. She decided to flunk me for being absent too much. Now that's when my lawyer stepped in. He called the school immediately to demand a meeting with the principal. At the meeting, he threatened to sue over political reprisals, but he already knew that was not going to be a winning argument. The key to winning my case was detail-oriented legal research. And somewhere in the New York statute books, he found a law that said students who get a high enough mark on New York's Regents exam in any class which concludes with such an exam will automatically pass. Now, the principal did not say much during the meeting. He looked pretty frustrated. But a few weeks later, my dad got a curt letter in the mail. It said, "We don't know what you're talking about. Your son graduated. His diploma was held because he failed to return a textbook. As soon as he brings it back, we will give him his diploma." Now, I know my dad won many other cases, but this is still the one that matters most to me. So thank you for honoring my dad for all his great legal work. And I still remember him for winning for me.
Thank you, Stephen. I recognize this picture. Frank had it on his desk for many, many years. Thanks for joining us. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Professor Paul Trachtenberg. Oh, someone has to unmute you, Paul. Just hold on. Will someone unmute Professor Trachtenberg?
Did that do it? I think so. Can you hear me? Maybe not.
Hear you, yes.
Yes? It's on?
We can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Frankly, my biggest challenge is how to compress into 3 minutes, which I'm going to try to do, my 50-year professional and personal relationship with Frank Askin. Frank and I were colleagues on the People's Electric Law School faculty starting in July 1970 when I joined him on the faculty. But we were more than just colleagues. From the first, we shared a deep commitment to using whatever means were available, including the highest courts in New Jersey and the United States, to further the cause of equality and justice under law. As so many have attested, Frank's accomplishments in that regard were legendary. Actually, my first exposure to Frank and his extraordinary commitment to these precepts happened just a short while after I joined the faculty. Frank and his colleagues and students in the still fledgling constitutional litigation clinic supported my early efforts to equalize New Jersey's school funding system in Robinson against Cahill. I don't know whether, I hope she's still with us, but as I recall, one of the students working with me in that group was Donna Lieberman, who has achieved her own great prominence through her leadership of the New York Civil Liberties Union. But I remember Donna as a student when we were meeting about formulating the first brief to the New Jersey Supreme Court in the Robinson case and trying to figure out what this constitutional phrase, thorough and efficient education, meant. And I think I have it right that Donna came into our meeting carrying the largest Webster's unabridged dictionary I had ever seen in pre-electronic online days. and essentially said, look, you guys, referring to the faculty, taught us that we give meaning to constitutions and statutes by starting with the plain meaning of the words used. And she opened the dictionary to the word thorough and said thorough means complete with attention to every detail. So we should be arguing in this case that a thorough and efficient education is the best possible education for all students in New Jersey. And I have to say that insight and that argument ultimately more or less prevailed in the case. So I'm in Donna's debt as I am in Frank's debt. I did what I could at the law school to support Frank's landmark efforts that you've heard a lot about, to diversify the student body through the minority student program, to modernize the curriculum, particularly through a major commitment to clinical education, and to empower the law school to serve the Newark and New Jersey community in which it had lived for many years, but they were communities that the law school did not serve very well or very much. Years later, I contributed a chapter to a book Frank inspired and compiled about the public interest activities of faculty members. Frank never forgot how closely intertwined his own professional and personal lives were with Rutgers Law School in Newark and its evolution. Frank excelled, as you've heard, as a student and as a teacher at the law school for more than 50 years. And he came to be, for all of us, students and faculty colleagues alike, a larger than life inspirational figure. But the relationship I developed and nurtured with Frank went far beyond the confines of the law school. You've heard from Marilyn about his commitment to bridge and his prowess at bridge. But for me, perhaps most prominently, Frank and I were mainstays of what is a still flourishing weekly poker game, probably 45 years at least since it began. And Frank and I remained as the only law school faculty members, although the game started as a law faculty game. We were joined after the faculty ranks thinned, and when Marilyn and Frank moved to Florida after his retirement, I was left the lone man standing, but we were joined by a lot of former students and an assortment of other good people. I have to say, in truth, the game ceased to be an all-faculty game after a few clever non-tenured people who played in the game realized that no non-tenure player had ever achieved tenure. By the way, Frank was as formidable at the poker table as he was in the classroom and in the courtroom. I have to say, I spied in looking at who was participating in this Zoom event honoring Frank, that we probably could field a whole poker table of people who at one point played in the game, I noticed. And if I leave somebody out, please forgive me. Lou Raveson, Ben Lavis, Herb Adlerberg, I think maybe Jeff Fogel, Johnny Askin himself, Jim Lowenstein, who continues to be a participant, Ed Barokas, maybe even Neil Mullins and Nancy Smith. So a lot of the poker crowd showed up to honor Frank, not just for poker, but for other things. I finally want to conclude by saying that Frank's and my connections extended beyond the law faculty and our colleagueship there, beyond even the poker table. Occasionally, we would drive together to the law school, particularly after I moved to West Orange, Marilyn and Frank's long home. On the morning of September 11, 2001, I picked up Frank to drive to the law school. As you may recall, it was an unusually clear and beautiful morning. When we reached the high point on Route 280, we were both startled to see plumes of smoke billowing out of one of the twin towers in the distance. I immediately turned on the car radio and heard some early reports when the prevailing thought was that there had been a tragic accident. By the time Frank and I reached the law school just a short while later, the explanation for the plumes of smoke was far more disturbing. And we, along with the entire law school community, were glued to whatever TV screens and radios were available. That's an indelible recollection of an experience that Frank and I had together, and I hope it's one I will never experience again. So for good and bad, for professional and personal, Frank looms large in my mind, in my memory, and in my heart, especially today when we formally celebrate him on First Monday, a program so near and dear to him. As all of you do, I miss Frank terribly, but I'm nourished and sustained by the abiding memory of who he was and what he accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, so much for those beautiful words. It's nice to see you. We will go to some of the other people who raised their hands, and I hope I get you in the order in which you did raise your hand. We'd like to hear next from Jim Dieterle. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yes, you are, and thank you for that. So I'm Jim Dieterle, and in the late 1990s, I became state director of AARP New Jersey. And one of my first challenges was to find a state president, a volunteer who would be state president of AARP New Jersey. And through some friends at the Department of Public Advocate and other places, I stumbled across Marilyn Askin. And after realizing that for 15 years, she had been director of the Essex County, all of her pro bono and other work, not to mention establishing the elder law section before the New Jersey Bar, Marilyn was the answer. And I have to tell you that Marilyn Askin changed my life and the lives of millions of New Jersey's 55 and better residents through her wonderful advocacy. She served for 6 years as AARP New Jersey state president. We had term limits, so she left there, but she quickly became the first and only chief legislative advocate for AARP New Jersey. And boy, was Marilyn successful. When she left after being state president, we had a ceremony called the 10 Pens ceremony. No other state president had ever participated in the signing of 10 new state laws, all benefiting consumers. And Marilyn was the first and only recipient of that. But after she left, she continued to volunteer for AARP in New Jersey, and she became our chief legislative advocate, working with a wonderful executive council and terrific staff. And that executive council included the new state president, Cy Larson, and Cy was chair of the Department of Labor Studies in the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers University. On our executive council was also Bob Holmes, a professor at Rutgers Law School in Newark. Bill Waldman, many of you know him as a not only a visiting professor, lecturer, executive in residence, former commissioner of the Department of Human Services, wonderful person, and Ken Lindhorst, who come from AT&T, a lawyer who volunteered for the executive council, was an expert on utility issues. And so Marilyn, on our executive council and as chief legislative advocate, continued to be the ultimate lobbyist for AARP New Jersey to help seniors and frankly, everybody in New Jersey driving through law after law. Eventually, I think her total reached 25 pens signed for various laws and executive orders that a multitude of governors, at least 4 or 5, had signed during my time at AARP and Maryland's time. And I have to tell you, she was such a joy to do. She would figure it out oftentimes way in advance and take action. So I just wanted to give my kudos, congratulations to Marilyn. Certainly I knew her husband, Frank, a wonderful, wonderful guy. As a graduate of the class of 1966, the 200th graduating class of Rutgers University, it was certainly a tremendous privilege and joy to work with the Askins on behalf of AARP and just see the wonderful, wonderful work that they accomplished, totally in line with their values and the values of AARP. So thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jim, for those wonderful remarks. And as John Dubin said earlier, maybe we should have a new name for the power couple, the Askin power couples, Franklin or something like that, Frank. Anyway, our next speaker is Yael Bromberg, also a former student. Yael, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Penny. Hi, everyone. It's great to see everyone here. I feel like we're ready to start a revolution. So as I said earlier to a few of Frank's friends and colleagues, and it's definitely true tonight. Frank will be sorely missed. I called him to tell him about a big case that me and Brett Pugash are bringing to challenge the ballot design in New Jersey, to challenge the local party, the party machines rule. I was really excited to tell him about it, and he would have loved it. He just would have loved the case. And I called his house line, and that's when Marilyn told me that he wasn't feeling very well. And so we kind of had a sense that things were the direction, unfortunately, that things were heading to. I really loved and continue to love the Askin family, Marilyn and Johnny, and he just, what Penny said was right. That picture that you have, he had that picture of all of his family, and he always highlighted it to his students. It was in his office, and he was very proud. He always talked about his grandchildren as well. I'll never forget meeting Frank for the first time. Somebody sent me to his office. I was a new 1L. I think I was the September of 1L year, and we were bringing a case in New Brunswick through referendum to challenge the system of representation in New Brunswick to a hybrid ward-based proposal. And Frank legitimized the campaign, and he legitimized, me as a 1L, as an organizer seeking a law degree. And that was just who he was, like there was a way to do things that the typical, law students go through. And then there were like the others. And Frank kind of created a home for the others and made us feel very seen and legitimized in the space as law students and in nurturing our future careers. And I think that was the first time when I saw Frank, he had this little like twinkle in his eye. And what I later would understand was that it really meant that he was up to good trouble because later I saw him in the cafeteria and he was like, "You're applying to the Kenoi Savis Fellowship, right?" And, it was an outstanding, the application had been long outstanding and it was on my list of things to do, like everything else for all the law students. But he said it in such a way that like, you couldn't say no. He just had this kind of beloved gruffness that was just like this insistence. And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna apply." And it turned out to be a home for me for 2 years as a 2L and a 3L. And I know a home for so many other clinical students who really found their footing and their space to learn how to practice law for the public interest. And, the one thing that stood out to me about Frank, and I appreciated even more later as I worked in clinical academia down the line a bit, was that he didn't just use it as a means to use students as workers on cases, which is kind of easy to do, to just assign the work, kind of like treat them as associates. But he really truly valued our contributions and encouraged our participation. I think that is kind of rooted in his value for participatory democracy, probably, and just for organizing in general. And so he really saw this as a space not just for students to do the work, but to shape the work. And I think that that's really Frank's contribution. You know, I could talk about the issues and the campaigns and all the great work that he did. You know, we went to the federal court in Newark with Bennett Zorovski to challenge the unconstitutional declaration of the war in Iraq on behalf of veterans and mothers of veterans. And he sent us to the local jails to register inmates to vote who were eligible. That not only made us election experts in that area of law, because we had to hand deliver the voter registration forms along with the absentee ballots on multiple trips, but it destigmatized those spaces for law students, and not just the public interest law students that were in the clinic, but the ones that we recruited to join our effort and co-sponsor that campaign. And so it actually had a wider impact beyond just kind of the choir itself. And so Frank just kind of created this space for us. And, you know, a lot of people, they claim that they support you, and Frank really delivered on it, and he shone a light on all of us. And we see that through, you know, the various speakers that have spoken today. And I know other people that are in the room as well. He and Marilyn came to my law school graduation party and they got into this great and famous debate over Israel, which was an interesting one that a lot of people kind of like joined in on. And I'll just, Marilyn is famous in our family because she and my mom sang Yiddish songs together, old Yiddish songs together at the graduation party. And so I always felt like an extended member of the Askin family. And Frank had this softness to him. I remember that despite the fact that he was such an intellectual, and that the intellectualism of his was, you know, kind of intimidating for these younger law students, he had this softness as well. And it's kind of like hidden under that gruffness that I mentioned earlier. I told him once I was going to DC, and he actually shed like a few tears. I like looked at him like, really? And but that's when I really understood kind of what he felt and what we meant to him. He didn't necessarily articulate it in the same way, but he felt it. And I think that the way in which he always saw us and used and really valued us in shaping the work makes us feel like we're a part of a movement, and we are part of a movement. And so I really appreciate Frank as seeing all of us and creating the space for clinical legal academia and onward. And it's not just those from Rutgers who might be in the room, but you know, throughout the country. Whenever I talk to folks about Frank, no matter where I am elsewhere, even if I don't know that he's connected to them, they know who he is and they know what his contributions were. So thanks for giving me this space to share, and Frank will be missed. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Yael. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about Frank's softness, that underneath that gruff exterior was a total teddy bear. And he really did. I know he really loved you, and he loved all of his students. And so our next speaker is Simone Klein. And then after that, Ed Barocas. So Simone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So if I would use three words to describe my Uncle Frank Askin, it would be true American hero. If we look at the first line of the Constitution, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that is what he fought for. But he was also a Jew. Many of us know here he wasn't the most traditionally religious or observant, but within my view of Judaism that was taught to me by my conservative, not political, just Judaism conservative rabbi at MIT, the study of anything important that helps humanity is equivalent to studying Torah. And by those standards, Frank is a true mensch and a holy man. As I assume there's greater than 10 Jews here, as I just heard someone mentioning Yiddish songs. I hope that all the Jews would join me for saying Kaddish for Professor Frank Askin. I'm going to share a link here for those who don't have it. And if any of the Jews are, a little bit on the fence about doing this, because technically we're only supposed to say it for people in our direct family. One thing I learned about this in the RBG memorial that I attended is that we can also say it for people who have those have done great things for society and are leaving a void. And for that, I feel as if, especially in this community, Frank provided that. So with great honor, would all the Jews join me in Kaddish for Frank? Yikadal Yikadash Me Rabbah. Ve'al Madid Raf Berute Ve'al Nichmakute Bahya Hayachon Ve'yomechon Ubayde Bechol Beit Yisrael Ba'alal Gizan Karib Be'enru Amen. Yehe Shme Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam Umumei Amayah. Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitabar V'yitramah V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitalel V'yitalel Shmei Kudashah Brichu. The Ela Min Kol Pirkata B'Shirata Tishbekata B'Nechemata Namiram B'Alma V'Imru Amen. Ye Shama Rama Min Shemaya Lechaim Aleinu Be'al Kol Yisrael V'Imru Amen. Osei Shalom B'Ramah Huya Say Shalom Aleinu Be'al Kol Yisrael V'Imru Amen. Thank you for allowing me to provide this service to the community who are there. And for anyone who's not Jewish out there, we should raise our glasses to Frank and say, if I remember properly, his favorite drink was a martini. And let's all say l'chaim.
L'chaim, indeed. Thank you so much, Simone. Ed Barocas, you're next. It's nice to see you, Ed. We need Ed's mic to be turned on.
Hello, can you hear me now? Okay, great, thanks. Well, I'm not going to speak that long, but I had the wonderful opportunity to not only know Frank Askin as a colleague, but I grew up with their family. I've been best friends with Danny Askin since first grade. So, I saw such wonderful characteristics in the whole family that you can see, interestingly, you could see Frank in his children, different aspects. First with Marilyn, just in her own daily living. What a strong, wonderful leader that she always is. And no surprise that she brought that and her passion to her work and succeeded. With Frank, any good civil rights lawyer who seeks to change the law has to have a brilliant, logical legal mind. They have to be incredibly creative because you don't change the law if you think in the status quo. And it helps to be very well-rounded, to draw on not a tunnel vision, but a wealth of knowledge, as well as being incredibly passionate. And, just knowing the children as I did growing up, to see those elements in them, Johnny's brilliant legal, logical mind that helps him succeed as his father. To see Andrea's just brilliant creativity and the light that shone through that creativity. And I can tell you, I know no one so well-rounded and who has such a breadth of knowledge about everything than Danny. And no one who argues with as much passion, intense passion, as I know from arguing with him for 40 years of everything from international relations to sports to a Bugs Bunny cartoon. And Frank had it all, but he had something else. From when I was a kid, there was this mystical quality about Frank. He was someone who was revered. And I didn't really get it as an 8, 10-year-old. I just knew here was someone I looked up to, and so did everyone else. And then throughout the years, when I went off to law school, I got law jobs through a public advocate, started doing constitutional law work, and then ultimately became the ACLU of New Jersey legal director. I got why. I saw the brilliance. You know, he had a campaign slogan when he ran for Congress. He had a song, Frank Askin for Congress, New Jersey needs his voice, were the first lines. And perhaps not in Washington did he get it done, but here in New Jersey, we needed his voice. We got his voice. Because of that, New Jerseyans have a voice stronger and more powerful than in any other state in the nation. We owe that to Frank Askin. And I owe to Frank Askin my beginnings as a ACLU legal director. You know, I was told, you know, you're not only co-counsel with all of our cooperating attorneys, but in ACLU cases, you're supervising them. And I said, oh, that's fine, even with, you know, more experienced attorneys, but not Frank. Frank is Frank. I don't supervise Frank. But what was great about him was that, as all of his students know, he made you feel comfortable going to him with suggestions, because he wouldn't rule anything out. He was open to other people, to their thoughts. He made me more comfortable in my first year and more as ACLU legal director to exert myself and be heard. So I owe a lot to him. He was my image of what a civil rights lawyer should be, as clearly he has been for so many of us. And his legacy will live on through the law and through all of those who he has taught, been a mentor to. And yep, l'chaim and Reza martini, dry, very dry martini to Frank Askin.
Thank you so much, Ed. Those were really beautiful words. Next, we're going to Richard Zimmerman.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. I couldn't hear myself, so I apologize. I'm one of Frank's students. That's when I met him for the first time, former students, I should say, although I think I've lived or tried to live a life similarly to his in a less active way, but in its own way. And I just want to talk about an incident that possibly changed my life as a result of my relationship with Frank. My wife and I got married in 1970. We moved to a place called Rutgers Village, coincidentally, in Morris County in Parsippany, and Route 280 was the road we used. I was able to commute to and from school while my wife got a job in her hometown of West Orange, teaching in the elementary school. In that November of 1970, by then I had met Frank, and we seemed to hit it off pretty well. We did a lot of talking to each other, although I wasn't a close family friend or anything like that. And we lived in the apartments, and there was an election in Parsippany for, in November for various positions. And my wife and I were going to vote at a hairdresser around the corner from Rutgers Village on Route 46, where they had one voting machine. And the line was getting long, and it was near the end of the evening. And my wife stepped in and voted. And what we decided to do was to nominate myself for the Democratic County Committeeman, because there was no one listed for that on the ballot that the absentee, the ballot we had gotten, not the absentee ballot, but the notice of what the election was all about in every sense. And my wife got in and attempted to vote, and there was a problem with the machine. She was asked to leave, and they would get someone to fix it. They did. It was about a 20-minute delay, and my wife went to go back into the machine to vote, and they said, "You can't go back in. You've already voted. You've been in the machine and you left." So we didn't argue with them. I went in to vote. The same thing happened, and they told me that I should leave the machine while they got it fixed, and they would get the person in a walkie-talkie back on who had already left a few minutes earlier. I refused to leave. The man got back, he fixed it. I stayed in the machine. I voted for myself. I got a 1-0 victory to be the Democratic County Committeeman. And I went to to show up I told Frank what I had done actually, and he congratulated me, and he got me to eventually participate in the administrative process project that was ongoing with the late Al Slocum and the Deputy AG Dave Ben Asher. But in any event, I went to the shape up in for all the new electees in Parsippany, and one of the favorite sons from Parsippany was a fellow named Dean Gallo, a Republican, who eventually, down about 15 years later, defeated Frank in the election for Congress that he did prevail eventually to get the nomination for, and lost. But in any event, Dean Gallo came up to me and said, "You're the one," and effectively, I guess the guy that fixed the machines was somebody who was active in the politics as well. But in any event, over the years, Frank and I remained in contact with each other. Periodically, I'd get into Newark and I'd stop by and say hello. And in the mid 80s, I was still living in Morris County, and Frank asked if I could introduce him around in his attempt to win in the election against Dean Gallo. And unfortunately, I mean, I took him around. I took him to the Reformed Temple I belonged to, Temple Shalom. I took him to a couple of other places that he had time to come and visit, and a debate with Dean Gallo. And obviously he didn't win. It would have been terrific if he did, and it was a tough area to win when they changed the districts. That's why Minish stopped running. They included places like Morris County that include a large Republican group of voters, and because of the proximity, and eventually Dean Gallo, he was a moderate Republican, so he's a decent guy, and he would see me in restaurants and he'd say, "You're the guy that tried to not make it possible for me to be elected. You came around with Frank Askin." And all I wanted to say, and I apologize for not being as close and as known to the family members as everybody else that's participating in this. I just thought it was an interesting ability that Frank had to take strangers like myself, although I guess as a student in the school, I was part of an extended family, and I feel that way now. But the inspiration of listening to him and watching the patience that he exhibited, the occasional exasperation he exhibited, the way he molded without attempting to, you never felt that you were anything but part of his space when you were with him. He was embracing, and it rubbed off. And as a result, whatever my instincts may have been, we were a pretty open-minded family when I was a kid in Queens before we moved to New Jersey. He was an inspiration that keeps me saying things like like we have to do a lot of things that need to be done, and hopefully it'll happen over the course of the next few months. But in any event, I could not remain silent in my tribute to him. I'm now almost 75-year-old guy who, the last 50 plus years has probably been so much better for just having known the late Frank Askin. I really think that he, it's and seeing and hearing from everyone else who were much closer to him and with him all the time. It's great, and I'm just sorry he's not with us anymore. But he is with us because he's left a terrific legacy, and hopefully the generations that come from people like me and others that have known him will allow this to happen and be ongoing for hundreds of years. If we're able to be around that long. I don't mean us personally, but I mean, given
Thank you, Richard. Oops, sorry.
Thank you. You can cut me off. It's fine.
No, I'm not cutting you off. Thank you, Richard, for sharing those stories with us. And can you imagine how the world would be different if Frank Askin actually won and served in Congress?
I was just about to say that, and thank you. Thank you.
The world would be a much better and different place. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Rob Steinbaum, who's going to read something that one of Frank's friends sent us. And if anybody else is interested in speaking, please raise your hand so we can call on you. Rob?
Yes, I'm reading a communication that we got from Lou Azaroff. I have a hearing problem, so I won't be with you at Frank's memorial service, but I'd like someone to read these brief comments about Frank at the service. I met Frank Askin about 1959. We sat alongside each other on the Bergen Evening Record copy desk. He was a skilled copy editor, fast and accurate. When we weren't editing stories, we'd gab, mostly about sports. He loved Baltimore teams, Johnny Unitas, the Baltimore Colts' great quarterback, and Brooks Robinson, the Orioles' superb third baseman, were his favorite subjects. I always enjoyed talking to Frank, a friendly gent with a pronounced Baltimore accent. Frank was one of the leaders in a guild movement at the paper. The guild lost the election and Frank was fired. While at the paper, Frank met Marilyn. They hit it off, got married, and 50 years later celebrated with a boat ride around Manhattan. My wife, Irma, and I were happy to be among the many folks aboard. Later, we saw Frank and Marilyn in Florida. We stayed in touch. I was saddened when he died. The world and the legal profession lost a great man, a gentleman. Marilyn, like you didn't know it, you married a great guy. Frank, may you rest in peace. Please don't try to unionize the Angels.
I love it. I love it. Now we'll hear from Peg Schaffer. Peg?
Unmute. Yeah, it's Peg Schaefer. Hi. So
Hi,
I've
Peg.
known Marilyn for a really long time. I'm off camera because I don't have access to a camera right now, but I miss him, and I got to tell a story. So Paul Trachtenberg, I'm not a Rutgers Law School graduate. I'm a Seton Hall Law School graduate, but Paul Trachtenberg talked about our poker game, and he forgot the women. I was in that game, and I think he forgot because we used to beat him much too often. And Art Penn was in the game, and Mike Marucci was in the game, and Nancy Erica Smith was in the game, and Neil Mullen was in the game. And one of my first martinis with Frank experiences was that I was a Scotch drinker and he was drinking martinis. I think that particular night, we probably had 4 of each. And on the way home, I got stopped at a DWI checkpoint. And in deference to some of the earlier speakers, Frank was called comrade. So the cop said to me, "So ma'am, you haven't been drinking, have you?" And I said, "No, I was playing in a poker game with a bunch of communist lawyers." And I had a few drinks, but I won. And so the officer let me pass on by. And all I can tell you is that, over the years, I've gotten to know Frank and Marilyn better. I've used them both as consultants. I depend upon them when I would get involved in a constitutional litigation issue. And Frank was always there at the ready, often to co-counsel or at least just give advice. But he's a man who is a giant among men. And I will be forever in his debt for all the good times, all the great fun that we had. And Marilyn, give me a call sometime. Love you.
Thanks, Peg. Anyone else? I don't see any other hands. So I'll close our, since there are no other speakers, I will close the program with a story I have about Frank. When Frank turned 70, I asked him very innocently, Frank, are you thinking of retiring? And what would you do? And he looked at me with disdain, which is, he never did that before. And he said to me, retire? Why would I retire? If I retired, I'd be doing exactly this. And then he went on to practice law for at least another 15 years. And I would say he still is practicing law through everyone who's spoken, through everyone who he has taught. And including through all the students in the clinical program. I see that Diana Sklar, our beloved colleague, has also raised her hand. So I will sign off after Diana speaks. So Diana, the floor is yours. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I just have a very small story to tell, but it fits in with much of what everyone has said here tonight. I was a colleague of Frank's for about 40 years, although our teaching interests were quite different. He was on the appointments committee that hired me, and we always had friendly chats when we saw each other. One day, the women's organization invited me to speak and introduced me as the matriarch of the faculty. And after I spoke, I was kind of amused by that. And I happened to run into Frank, and I said, Frank, the women have just regarded me as the matriarch of the faculty. And he looked at me and he said, I guess that makes me the patriarch of the faculty. And although he was amused by that, Frank truly was the patriarch of the faculty.
Thanks, Anna. And I can't think of a better way to end this program. He really was the patriarch of the faculty. Thank you so much to everyone who attended this memorial service, and to the Askin family. We love you very, very much. Congratulations to Marilyn and to Johnny for their well-deserved awards. And Frank, you're with us every day. We miss you. We love you. And there's no one else like you. Have a good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for participating. And hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.